Hello everyone, and thank you for coming. We are the CaNOP Cubesat project. As you can see from the screen, CaNOP stands for Canopy Near-Infrared Observing Project. My name is Jeremiah Munson. I am a rising sophomore majoring in physics and the systems engineering project. We have a large group of people working on it this summer. Unfortunately, only a couple will be presenting, so I'll let them introduce themselves now.
My name is Nycole Huff, and I'm a rising sophomore majoring in physics.
Hello, I'm Michael Hernandez. I'm a rising sophomore majoring in physics and computer science.
I'm Ashley Marquette. I'm a rising senior majoring in physics.
Our project is to build a satellite about the size of a loaf of bread that's going to be taking remote sensing data of forest canopies, hence our logo. So this is everyone who's working on the project currently, and as you can see, it's a large group. There's about 17 of us, and 10 of us are actually freshmen. So what is a CubeSat? Well, the green cube here is an example of a 1 unit or 1U CubeSat. It has the dimensions of 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. And that's really all it takes to be a CubeSat. The only requirements are the dimensions. For 1U, it's 10 by 10 by 10. For 2U, it's 10 by 10 by 20. And for 3U, that's our satellite, it's 10 by 10 by 30. In fact, here is a 3D printed model of the skeleton of our CubeSats. All of the components that we have are going to fit in a structure this size and shape. So, the man holding the CubeSat in the picture is Professor Bob Twiggs, who in 1999 created the CubeSat while he was a professor at Stanford. He was trying to find a way to get his grad students to design, build, test, and operate a spacecraft. One day, while Professor Twiggs was shopping, he came across a Beanie Baby, and when he saw the display case it came in, he realized that it would be the perfect size for a spacecraft that his grad students could work on. In the past, CubeSats have typically been what we would call a beepersat. A beepersat is a satellite that has a simple technology objective. Usually a beepersat would just go into orbit and start sending a signal that it's alive. And if it did that, then the mission was considered a success. An example of a beepersat is the PhoneSat. The PhoneSat is a 1U CubeSat that has a cell phone as its flight computer. The flight computer is kind of like the motherboard in your laptop. Now, most people have probably heard that a modern-day smartphone has more power than an Apollo mission computers. And while that's true, there's a lot of dangers in space that modern technology, such as a smartphone, can't work with that the Apollo computers were shielded from. These dangers are solar radiation, the fact that it's in a vacuum, microgravity, and the temperature range. Nowadays, CubeSats aren't just for grad students, but also undergraduates like ourselves, as well as national space agencies, private companies, high schools, and even 1 or 2 elementary schools. CubeSats aren't just beepersats anymore either. Some examples: on the left, there's Swiss Cube 1, which was designed by a Swiss institution to photograph a phenomenon called air glow that occurs in the upper atmosphere when solar radiation interacts with oxygen molecules. On the right is the Cubesat, designed by Stanford. It is designed to detect ELF signals, or extremely low frequency signals, that are believed to precede earthquakes. And from this satellite, they hope to predict when and where earthquakes will happen. Our CubeSat is different. We're trying to provide a cheaper alternative to a legacy satellite, the Landsat, pictured on the right. The Landsat is designed to provide space-based, moderate resolution, land remote sensing data. This data can be used for anything from agriculture, geology, forestry, mapping, global change monitoring, among other things. Also, due to the Landsats covering the Earth in a matter of 16 days, the Landsats have become invaluable for disaster relief. There's some big differences between the Landsat and our satellite, though. One is the cost. As you can see, Landsat 9, which is currently being assembled, costs $650 million. Our CubeSat, we only got about a couple $100,000 to work with. There's also the personnel. For the Landsat 9, it's going to take legions of scientists and engineers to assemble it and then operate it when it's in orbit. For our CubeSat, we'll have 10 to 20 undergraduates working on it at any given time. These are computer-aided design images of our CubeSat. The bottom image is a picture of how our CubeSat is designed right now with all the components organized inside of it. The top image shows each individual component and has them labeled. Now, each of these individual components has a specific subsystem or team of people on the project that specializes in that component. And these are people that we can go to if there's any problem with part of the CubeSat. They make sure that we use the right part. Now, for more on the individual subsystems, what we've been doing over the past couple months, I'm going to hand it over to Mike Hernandez.
Thank you, Jeremiah. As stated earlier, I'm Mike Hernandez. I'm part of the telecommunications and flight software team. We started this whole project in about October, and we started with about 7 to 9 people. And of course, now we have more. We started with the basic, we have our mission plan, and then we need to start to talk about constraints or needs we have to meet in order to build this. One of the constraints that really brings a lot out is size. We need to talk about what's the difference in size as compared to, we're trying to have the functionality of the Landsat 9 mentioned earlier, but we have much less to work with. As they had a 10-foot tall satellite, we have a 3U little cube right here. We also have a difference in cost as compared to a $650 million. We only get to work with $250,000. And those are some things that affect the CubeSat directly. But there's also things that affect the CubeSat that aren't direct, such as we're going to be flying around multiple different countries, such as countries in the Middle East and countries in North Korea. And we have to talk about that because we're having an American satellite go over these different countries with a camera, and they might not like that. So we have to talk about things such as that. Now, we talked about these constraints for a while. And after we have many of the constraints kind of just figured out and what we have to go over, we start to create subsystems. These subsystems work on specific constraints, such as flight software has to work with things with the computers and the running of everything. Telecommunication has to work with talking back down to Earth from space and things like that. The hierarchy is as shown in the picture to my left, is we have all the subsystem teams and they have to talk to the systems engineer, Jeremiah, who then talks to our PI or our principal investigator, Kevin Crosby. And then we also have social media and outreach, and we'll go to schools and talk about stuff like this. And that has to correspond with Christine, the Wisconsin Space Grant. Now, we've been working on this for a while, of course. We started in October. And around the time of April, we got accepted. We had sent in a document earlier giving NASA what our mission plan is, what our goal is, who we all are, and everything that's intertwined in that. And of course, they came back and they accepted our idea. So as of April, we had an 18-month time period to build the CubeSat. So that's not a lot of time when compared to other satellites, but it's what we were given. And we have 18 months and then $250,000 to build this. Now, fast forward to about 2 weeks ago, we had been working on this a lot. But then we started to put together the CODR, also known as the Concept of Design Review. It's about a 60-page document that we're going to give to NASA, and it basically tells them all of what we know right now. And there's going to be multiple of these. Currently, we're on the preliminary design review, also known as the PDR. And that's just going to be a more detailed version of the CODR. And we're going to keep sending in these reviews until we get to a point where NASA believes that we can build the CubeSat bolt by bolt. Now, once we actually start to build the CubeSat, and it's completely built, we're going to have to go through multiple different tests, such as vibration testings, thermal testings, electronic testings, multiple different tests to prove that we have something that's ready to be launched into space. Now, as soon as we have all this built and it's been tested, there's going to be a 12-month period where NASA will have it, and they will be deciding everything that's going to happen with it, such as where is it going to be launched and what it's going to launch out of. If you see on my left, there's multiple different places and examples of where it can be launched from and what it's going to launch on. And the neat fact is that when this is all picked out, when we have location and what rockets it's on, we're actually going to be there to watch our entire project be launched towards the ISS. Now, more on the ISS, also known as the International Space Station. I'm going to hand it off to Mike Huff.
Thank you, Mike. Now, I'm Michael Huff. I'm a member of the Education and Outreach, Science, and Camera Subsystems. Now, one novel thing about this project is that astronauts will not only be handling our CubeSat, but, and this is probably actually one of the coolest parts of the project, is they'll be getting their mission directives from us. And there's a kind of step process that happens is once our rocket gets to the ISS and delivers its cargo, the astronauts have to test it to make sure A, it didn't break on launch, and B, when we launch it, it's not going to break other people's payloads or blow up the ISS. And hopefully, if everything goes well there, what we can actually do is deploy it into space. And if you see here, what the astronaut does is, there's kind of like a breech loading cannon on the ISS, is they put it in, they close it, they press a button and it launches off into space, and you kind of see it starts to tumble around low Earth orbit. And to tell you a little bit more about how we correct that, I'm going to introduce you to Ashley Marquette.
Hi, once more, I'm Ashley Marquette. I am part of the Attitude, Determination, and Control System team, or the ADCS, because, well, we can't say that every time we talk about it. Now, what the ADCS is in charge of is to determine and then fix, if necessary, our orientation and alignment with our orbital track, our movement. Now, as previously stated, as seen in the video, once we're deployed, we won't be in a stable orbit. We will tumble. And this we cannot allow during our entire flight. We have certain systems that have to be facing a certain direction at any given time. Our camera has to face the Earth, we have a GPS antenna that has to face space, and we have sensors that have to face the horizon at any given time. So how do we fix this? How do we orient our and detumble our Cubesat in space remotely? Well, Cubesats typically do 3 methods. They either apply external torques through thrusters, they change the moment of inertia, or they apply the conservation of angular momentum. Now that third option, the conservation of angular momentum, is the one we're going to apply for our Cubesat. Now a quick recap on the conservation of angular momentum. It's best described through a bicycle wheel. So as it spins, we will produce a cross product of the angular velocity and the moment of inertia, creating a torque. Now this vector quantity torque will not change unless there's an exterior force applied to our system. Through that conservative force, new torque, that torque will change its value, try to stabilize the system, try to conserve angular momentum. And that's what we're going to do. So within the ADCS, which is actually a box put in the Cubesat, we will have 3 momentum wheels, one for each Cartesian axis, X, Y, and Z. During detumbling, we will accelerate our wheels in the opposite direction of rotation to create an opposing torque. That torque will slow down our Cubesat and detumble it within a few revolutions depending on launch and tip-off rates. Now, there's a problem. We can't depend on the momentum wheels by themselves because this will be occurring throughout the entire flight. They will always be spinning. And once they reach a point when they spin too fast, they become saturated. Once they become saturated, we are no longer to affect external torques. And yes, in space there are sources of external torques. The main one we're worried about is the one produced by the Earth through our orbit. Now typically, during the way that happens, is our Cubesat, one end will become a little bit faster and turn so it's vertically facing the Earth. Most Cubesats don't have to worry about this problem to such a degree that we do because their camera is typically is on these short ends, on the Z face. Our Cubesat is different. Our Cubesat, we have our camera on one of the long ends, the negative Y surface. So we have to keep our Cubesat like this during the entire flight. And as I pointed out before, we can't depend on momentum wheels, so the ADCS will provide other actuators, other torques, and namely through magnetic torque rods. But once we have finally achieved that, our Cubesat is properly oriented where our camera is facing the Earth, then we can take pictures. And to talk about exactly how we're taking these pictures, I'm going to return it back to Mike Huff.
Thank you, Ashley. Now, once we're oriented, we can get to the fun part, and that's taking pictures. And if you look at the diagram on your right, this is a simulated run over one of our forests. This is El Cura in northern Venezuela, and it's ringed in the white. Now, this red block represents what's called our scan swath, and this is the width of our image projected down on the Earth, and that's about 125 kilometers. And as the Cubesat travels along its orbit, if I can get you to look at the one on the left here, it takes these long rows of images. And eventually, over the course of several orbits, we get this composite image that we can actually start to use to gather data from. It's kind of like the panorama feature on your phone, though it's longer instead of wider. Now, once we actually have our data taken, our pictures back to Earth, we can start processing it. And we're going to be using something called NDVI, which which stands for the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. And what that is a ratio of the amount of near-infrared light reflected from a scene to the amount of red light reflected. And this is applicable because near-infrared light is most reflected by healthy vegetation, plants, trees, and those kinds of things, whereas red light is reflected by rocks, erosions, etc., things like that. And it gives you a fairly good idea of where the vegetation is in a given area. And if you look at this picture, this is another one of our forests. This is the Sangatrai National Forest in Central Africa. You can get a pretty good idea based upon what the green is, where our forests are and the density of the vegetation. The purple represents the lack of vegetation. And if you look on the very left of the screen, there is just a big purple blob, and that's actually the Atlantic Ocean. So that's devoid of any sort of ground-based vegetation. And then to the north, there's a purple swath. That's the Sahara Desert. Now, before we can actually start doing this process, we have to get our data back down to Earth. And we're going to be sending our signals to something called ground stations. And those are massive arrays, like the one poking out of Earth there, that are used to capture our signals. And they port through something called the Near Earth Network, which is a community of arrays that NASA operates that's designed to take data from satellites and give it to their respective mission teams. One issue we've run into, though, is we have a very small bandwidth. So we're not necessarily going to be able to transmit all of our data at once. We may have to transmit halfway, or we may have to transmit one picture, half of it across the globe from the other half of it. So we're not going to be getting all of our data all at once. And to give you an idea of a simulation orbit, I'm going to hand it back over to Jeremiah.
So the video I'm going to play for you shortly is a simulation from our mission simulation software. It depicts a scenario that we'll most likely encounter several times while our Cubesat is in orbit. Now, the simulation has been sped up by about 140 times, so it is not real speed. Let's talk about this still for a second. Behind the play button is our Cubesat, and it's represented by a red dot, and the red dot will be the center of the video at all times. You can see below below on the ground, there's a rectangle in red, and that represents what the camera sees, as Mike explained just a couple of slides ago. Also here, there's these green lines kind of coming out from the Cubesat. Those represent where the GPS system on the Cubesat is receiving signals from the GPS satellites in orbit. So that way our Cubesat knows its latitude, longitude, and altitude. So it knows when to take an image and when to begin downlinking. So here's our Cubesat, and here it just flew over the Sangatrai National Forest in Africa, one of our target forests, and it took the image of the forest. So now we're going to orbit, and we're orbiting just outside of range of ground station in Australia. We're unable to do any linking. We're approaching a Hawaiian ground station here. Here we are within range to downlink, but we still won't be able to. Because there isn't any direct sunlight on the solar panels, we won't have enough power to actually do the downlink. Same for walrus. So we have to keep orbiting, and starting about here, we've reached a full revolution, full orbit, so it's been about 90 minutes, and we still haven't had a chance to get any of our image. So we have to keep going until we get back to the Australian ground station that we orbited just outside of range of before. And here we can begin to downlink a fraction of the image that we actually got to take. As our satellite orbits, it will slowly but surely lose altitude. And after about 4 years of orbiting and even more years of hard work and dedication on our part, our satellite will begin to burn up in the atmosphere, kind of like our own shooting star. Thank you for listening to our presentation. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and Snapchat. We're at Carthage Cubesat. So now we're taking any